Welcome to the Career Coffee Chat podcast. I'm your host, Byran Urban, certified career strategist and executive coach, removing career roadblocks so you can achieve more impact, influence, and income. Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live, my friends. Who says you can't have it all? I am your host, Byran Urban, and if you are interested in achieving epic performance in your life and in your work, you are tuning in to the right show today. So don't be shy. Say hi, say where you're tuning in from, whether you're watching or listening live or to the replay or to the podcast. Speaking of, be sure to check out Career Coffee Chat podcast on your favorite podcast provider and support the show with a rating. Your feedback is so important, and I'd love to hear from you. Today is super exciting because we'll hear from Byran Gillette as he shares his insights from interviewing over 100 leaders on how they overcame obstacles to achieve epic success. Now, honestly, what I'm most interested in is how he successfully managed a 7-month sabbatical to tour the world with his family and also completed multiple ultra marathons. Now, as a retired competitive athlete, I know how much training and dedication goes into completing marathon and epic events like this. So it'll be really interesting to hear from Byran how those lessons from his competitive events, as well as sabbatical, and what he learned from these top leaders has changed his life. So if you're ready to shed those limiting beliefs and see epic performance in yourself and in your teams, we're happy to have you on the show. So come on in. Don't be shy. Say hi. We'd love to hear from you. Share your comments and your questions. If you're watching the replay later, just know that we're here for you. Reach out to us. Now, more about Byran. He has over 25 years of experience in leadership and organizational development with executive senior level responsibilities in small and large organizations. And he wrote Epic Performance, Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak, recently released. So I'm really excited to have Byran on the show. Byran, great to see you today.
Byran, it is a pleasure to be here. Nice to talk to you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I also want to say hi to Donna, who's tuning in for LinkedIn. She gave us a little shout out. So if you're tuning in for wherever you are in the world, we'd love to hear from you, whether that's live or watching the replay. Now, Byran, I'm anxious to hear all about the sabbatical, but I got to know first. What was the catalyst for the book? Everybody has a catalyst. I'm really interested to hear what inspired you.
Since I was in college, I kind of wrote down my life lists and, a bunch of things on there, but one of them was to write a book. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it's like, I don't have anything of value to write. And so, but I want to be able to, over the course of my life, build up a body of knowledge, build up something that could turn into a book. And so that has always been a dream. And it's, as we'll talk a lot about, I love goals and love setting kind of lofty goals. And that one was I thought a good one. So it's been something that's been on the back of my mind for 30 plus years. And having done a lot of ultra distance endurance athletes, having been an executive at a number of companies, I thought, okay, I probably have something to write about.
Probably do.
And so it's like, all right, let's start to tackle this one. So that was the catalyst. It goes back a long way.
Yeah. Now let me ask you a question. During this journey, did you have people ask you, gosh, how do you complete these amazing goals?
I see it a lot in, I see it two areas. And that was another one of the reasons for kind of, I got to do this book. My wife, you talked about taking a sabbatical. So a 7-month sabbatical. So before I got married, my wife and I, we were dating and we spent 7 months traveling around the world. And then just a couple of years ago, we took our 2 boys, who at the time were 8 and 10. They turned 9 and 11 on the trip, and took them for a 1-year trip around the world. And so, we spent, 4.5 months in South America, 4.5 months in Africa. We spent a month in the Middle East. And so before we went, we had a number of friends our friends held a going away party. And for us, and a number of people came up and said, I could never do what you're doing, kind of taking this year off and traveling around the world. And I thought that was so sad that they said that. And if it was something where it was, I don't want to do what you're doing, I get that. Because not everybody wants to do it. But when they said I could never do it, I thought, you probably could. And so how do you kind of take that, I could never do something, I can't do it, and do it, assuming you want to. So, I mean, that was kind of one of the other catalysts and kind of how
you're right. I mean, it is a difference, a very important distinction, because I've heard, after I've completed some pretty significant cycling events. Now, I have not done an ultramarathon like you have, but on the cycling front, I have completed a 100-mile gravel race at 12,000 feet. And that was good enough for me, but anybody that I would tell that to, unless they're a fellow competitive gravel cyclist, they're like, I would never want to do it. It was I couldn't and I don't want to. So I was like, yeah, this is not everybody's thing. But then when I shared, the fact that I live a very fulfilled and happy life, where I am is a wonderful place, and I share these things that are very obtainable. Well, I don't know if I could do that. It's very sad, because I know you can.
Doesn't it just kill you? Because
it's just like, of course we can, and you want to help them. So that is a great catalyst for the book.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I'm anxious to hear more about the sabbatical, naturally, but
we'll dig into that one.
We'll dig into that later. But what was, when you were interviewing those 100 executives, I'm wondering, what was kind of the common theme that really stuck out to you?
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of things that stood out. I mean, first of all, they were very future focused. And so, and not just a year out or 2 years out. I mean, these people were looking 10, 15, 20, 30 years out. Number of people that, started up technology companies and thinking, okay, we don't have the capability in technology now, but what will we in 10 years? And when we have that, what is it I can start designing now that will help the world, that when, in 10 years it will?
That's what always impressed me with people in that zone of genius, to have that, what I call futuristic point of view, being a futurist and being able to see what's going on now and what's being developed, and being able to take that leap into the future and connect those two dots. It's truly a talent. I want to give a shout out to Travis tuning in. Great to see you, Travis.
Hey, Travis. It is. And so one of the guys I talked to, he said, I have these ideas, but these ideas can't be implemented with our current technology platform, with our speed, with our memory, with whatever it is. But at the rate we're moving, that technology, those capabilities will exist in the next 10 years. So how do you drive to that? So, to your question, I mean, these people were very future focused in terms of what they did. They were very focused on where they wanted to go and set a plan in order to get there. So they didn't just, okay, let's just kind of let fate take me where we go. They knew that they wanted to go over here, and they aimed for over there. And maybe they didn't land on that exact same spot, but they landed somewhere in the vicinity.
Right. They had a framework. They had a framework
and a general direction of where they wanted to go.
So I want to touch on that really quickly, and I'd love to hear from anybody tuning in either now or later. When it comes to achieving goals, does any of this resonate with you? And most importantly, what tends to kind of get you derailed? Because that happens, right? So I'd love to hear from you. And that framework is so important. I know this because the only reason, well, I won't say the only reason, but one of the main reasons that I'm successful in my business is because I have a healthy project management, not only mindset, but background. And when you know how to create kind of like a plan, and again, I encourage people not to go to the finite details, because sometimes that can actually constrain you versus opening you up. And I see you that resonated with you, because I have a quote, and I've shared it for like a dozen people this week. So this is something, I have a whole quote deck. My friend made this lovely deck of cards to help you really like shift your mindset. And this one's stuck, and it's been in place for like months.
I don't have to understand all the details to be a massive success. Yeah.
Right. Having the framework is really, really important, but you don't need to know all of the details.
Yeah.
Because the more minutia you put in there, I feel like it's harder to achieve. What do you think?
Well, I think there's some component that you and I were talking beforehand. I tend to be very structured, and I like to know those details. But after interviewing the 100 people, I realized there were some people that were that knew all the details, put their plan in place, and were really successful. There were other people who had a rough idea of the plan and were still very successful. So, what I loved talking to these people about is, I've got a model that has kind of 5 elements. And so I'll hit those is what envision stands for. E is how do you envision the big things? Or I'm sorry, what EPIC stands for.
Right.
How do you envision the big things? The P is how do you put a plan in place, which is what you and I were talking about. The iterate is I is how do you iterate, work your way up to the big ideas. You don't start at the top. You start working small and you work your way up. You build confidence.
You don't try to eat the elephant in the day.
No, what's the best way to eat an elephant? One bite at a time. The C is how do you collaborate with others who've done something like this before? And then lastly, how do you go perform? And when you look at it, not all the people I interviewed are great at all 5. In fact, they're generally good at maybe 2 or 3 and know how to compensate for the others. Right. And some people really good. The best CEO I ever worked with for, he was one of the guys I interviewed, and he goes, Brian, I'm not great at the strategy part. And he goes, but I'm really good at planning and iterating. And so I have to compensate. I have to bring in people that can envision. And we don't have to be great at all 5, but you probably got to be really good at a couple and then figure out, all right, how do I compensate for the areas I may not?
That's really important in knowing your strengths and knowing and being not trying to be all things, because that, if you do, then you're not good at anything. Yeah. Travis has some interesting questions here. I'd love to touch on that if that's okay.
Sure.
Because I tend to suffer from shiny object syndrome. Ooh, I know that one very well, Travis. Thank you for sharing. He says, otherwise known as ADD. I don't know. I think I like shiny object syndrome better. I think everybody has that. That can definitely derail plans, at least on a momentary basis, right? He said, my friend, a business coach, suggested either taking a tactical or strategic focus. Tactical starting with the details and working up, whereas strategic is starting with the end destination, working down. He says the confusion sets in when he tries to do both.
Yeah.
What do you think, Brian?
Well, I work with one of my clients. I think it sounds very similar to Travis, what you're talking about. And you see a shiny object over here and he goes off it. And so part of what I do with him is I'm facilitating a large executive retreat for him. And so as we're leading up to that, he's going, oh, we should do this. We should do this. And he's all over, squirrel, and he's all over the map. But what he's really, really good at, and Travis, maybe this is you, is he's really good at being able to kind of see different things and try to explore. And so you're probably really good on the envisioning side. Now, what I have to do is eventually kind of, all right, let's kind of rein in on all those squirrels and figure out what's the right one we have to focus on. So really kind of lean into that, that shiny object, but know that at some point you have to kind of figure out, okay, what is the right shiny object I need to focus on now?
Right. Absolutely.
So, Aaron, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Sounds like, Travis, you're a great ideator. Ideation is a gift, by the way, so embrace it.
It is.
Don't try to push it away. It's a wonderful thing to have. And a lot of people don't have that. Yeah. They don't have any imagination, so embrace it. So I suffer from that too, particularly when I was early on in my business, and I understood less what my zone of genius was, like how I was able to leverage my unique gifts, what things drained me. That was
Yeah.
an eye opener. Like, okay, yes, you can be here, and know that it will take a lot of energy for you to be there. So is that something you really want to focus on? Like,
Yeah.
what really gives you fulfillment? What is your targets? How do you want to be, whether that be in your work or your life? And understanding, that E and the EPIC model.
Yeah.
Where are you headed?
Yeah.
And then, and again, it's not oh, you have to be in this box and you can't go outside of the box. That's not the point. It's you have a target you're aiming for. And so that way, when the shiny object comes up, you can go, okay, this is amazing. Have the moment of amazement and then go, okay, how does this align with where I'm going?
Right. And what's
What is it
important?
going to take from me? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I used to think that, okay, to be, a successful leader or successful in business, you have to be able to do these things and you have to do them all and you kind of have to do them well. But, the more I do the research, the more I learn about and talk to these successful folks is you can have success. You can be a great leader and have completely different skills than another great leader.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you lean into kind of that superpower? So how do you lean into, if you're Travis, to that being able to kind of see things and see things and envision things that so many people can't. But then at some point you have to realize, okay, I need some help with somebody to kind of take that idea and bring it to fruition. So, yeah.
Right.
I love this.
And you're
stuff.
right about this, the tactical and the strategy part. Strategy is having the vision, and tactical is how do you get there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Strategizing and tactic, and some people get those kind of mingled up. We were talking before the show about how we tend to let other people drive our idea of success.
Yeah.
So there's another element too. Is it authentically something that you want to do, or is it something you think you should do?
Yeah.
I
I loved where we were going with that because, and maybe people can put some of this in the comments, is kind of what's your definition of success? I mean, I think we often see success as, okay, how far do I get up the ladder? How much money do I have? How big is my house? What type of car do I drive? And because that's what people see. And so there's that view that sometimes that's how we define success. And I think, we have to look at, okay, how do you really define success? Now, I shouldn't define success based on what I want you to think about me. I should define success on base what I want. And I often look at my brother and I, we've gone down very different paths. And we have very different things. Our careers looked very different. But I think in his world, it's what he wanted. And so I would say he's very successful. Right. And in my world, it's what I wanted. And so I would say the same thing. So even though we're different, we've gotten to different points. We got to where we wanted to get. And so I think we just have to redefine what success looks like.
That's right. I mean, it looks very different for very different people. Yeah. I am a wildly successful coach, but my success model may not be someone else's success model. They may think, well, I can only be a successful coach if I'm coaching, I don't know,
so many people at a certain rate.
Right, yeah. or a certain status level or something, whatever their thing is. Yeah. People have their thing. And if that truly makes them happy, that's one thing. But if you're doing it because you want to make other people think more highly of you, that's a different thing.
Yeah, no, and I know there have been times that I have made decisions, kind of made a decision either on a career path or a certain project, okay, because this is going to be good for my success, will make me look good for the company. Maybe I won't enjoy it. And sometimes I think in life we have to do that to get to a certain point that leads us to a bigger thing that we want.
Yeah. There's a difference between a season and a syndrome, as I mentioned earlier.
And I love, you and I were talking about that earlier. I mean, explain that, kind of define kind of what you mean by that, because I loved how you
Right.
explained it to me, Aaron.
Yeah, because you were talking, Brian, and it was perfect because you mentioned, in order to achieve goals, sometimes we need to sacrifice things. And I was like, oh, okay, hang on here.
You didn't
I'm
like
hopping
that.
all over that. I go, oh, wait a minute. Let's fact check that really quick, because here's the deal. There's a difference between sacrificing and then momentarily in the season. Or are you just sacrificing and it becomes a syndrome of sacrifice?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? The difference is a season has a definitive end date. You know that it's going to last this long or require this much investment of your energy, or there's some sort of boundary or constraint around it.
Yep.
So you know that you will need to show up in a certain way, and you'll be able to let those people who you might be sacrificing their time with you too, let them know and having that agreement. When it becomes a syndrome is because when there's no agreement, there's no boundaries, there's no defined structures, there's no outline, you're not really sure, and you're just in this blind tornado of poop, also called SHIT storm. I mean, it's just, you're in this thing. And so let me know if that resonates with anybody listening either now or later, because there's a difference between a season and a syndrome. When you can't see the way out of it and you don't know when it's going to end, it becomes systemic, and that's a problem.
And it's hard to know, okay, is this just a season I'm going through? And if it's lasting for a couple of months, 6 months, maybe even a year, okay, maybe that's a season. If it's lasting for 5, 10 years, I think that's where it gets to what you're saying.
I think you need to see a therapist at that point, Brian. We're really not wanting to last that long. And I'll tell you why, because when it comes to mindset or mental perspectives, which, by the way, drives goal achievement, among other things, how we experience life, when we're in a frame of mind for a couple days, that's a mood. It'll pass.
Yeah.
No big deal. It's not going to impress upon your actual neural network and become a habit.
Yeah.
And if you're in that place for a prolonged period of time, then it becomes a habitual way of being, and it takes concentrated effort to shift. You can shift it, just like any other habit. You have to practice a different way of being. But I think a lot of people are seeing that as an outgrowth of the pandemic and everything they were going through. I've had multiple people come to me and say, I am a different person. I was like, do you want to be that person?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think... And that's what I am hopeful that as we come out of this thing, I'm thinking we're coming out of it, but I've said that before, is that we can look back on the last 2.5 years and think, okay, what do I want to fundamentally do different? I know every night I go for a walk with my wife, and that's something we started doing, and I just love that time. Right. And I know other people have done that. It's like, okay, when you get back into, we could say is more of a normal time.
Whatever
how
that
do you,
is.
Yeah. What normal time for you? How do we keep those things that we really liked out of the last year? I mean, I'm hopeful that it kind of helped us look at what do we value that is important, and how do we get to those things. So.
Good to see you, Mariana, tuning in from YouTube. By the way, we're live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn simultaneously. Yay, powers of technology. So
gotta love it.
I want to get back to those interviews, because you have some really important insights there. One of those was having an outline, and also knowing that you can be really good at something. You don't have to be good at everything. Yeah. But most importantly, having an understanding of where you're going and having that outline, being able to express the plan, the goal, and how we might be able to get from point A to point B. Now, what else was it that really stood out from you from those interviews with 100 executives that was the fuel for your book, along with your own experience, of course? And we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them is the confidence level that these folks had. And the confidence, I mean, they all had, not all, but most of them had confidence in themselves. And knew that when they were taking on something really difficult, and most of these people, so just to give you a point of reference, so about 75% of these folks were executives, C-level folks, CIOs, CEOs, or founders of companies, or kind of entrepreneurs. And then the other 25% were ultra distance athletes. And the way I defined an ultra distance is somebody that had run the equivalent or done the equivalent of an Ironman. So an Ironman, you know, I'm sure you know what it is, but for those that aren't familiar, it is a 2.4 mile swim, followed by a 110 mile bike ride, followed by a 26.2 mile run. So it is a significant event. You know, people that had done a 100-mile run. I spoke to 2 people who did 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. So it really pushes the mind and the body, more so the mind, to new limits. And so that was kind of the level, but they all had confidence that they could go and achieve these difficult things. And so that was a big thing. And that confidence came from doing smaller things. So you don't start off
doing. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do 100 miles from zero. You're working your way up.
Yeah,
right?
It's the iterate part of Epic. I mean, you did not get on your bike and ride 100 miles, I would venture to say.
I did not get on my bike and do a 100-mile gravel race in northern Idaho at 12,000 feet overnight. No.
You probably started, I'm going to go out and do 5 miles and then 10 miles. And I remember when I did my first marathon, and, you know, I wasn't a runner. I had always been a cyclist, and I had just finished a 300-mile one-day bike ride. And so as I was coming to the end, I thought, okay, and this is going to spur us into other conversations. I thought, what next? and that's when the marathon, it's like, oh, you know, the marathon's kind of the ultimate in running. Why don't I try that? It'll be a good challenge for me. And so a couple of weeks later, as I started, okay, I need to start training for a marathon. I got a pair of running shoes, and I went out and I go, you know, my legs were in good shape. I just ran 300 miles. I'm going to go out I just rode 300 miles. I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this 4-mile loop from my house.
I know where this is going. I know where this is.
You know this because you've done this. And so I ran the 4 miles. I came back. I was on a couple calls, and then I had to go upstairs to go to the bathroom. And I'm walking upstairs, and it's like, oh, my legs are really sore. It's like, running legs and cycling legs are different, as you could appreciate.
Well, not totally, but a lot, very different.
They're more different than you would think. And it's like, okay, 4 miles, that hurt. And next week it's going to be 5 miles. And so you iterate. But I had the confidence that I could eventually do 26.2, not that day. And so they had the confidence. And the other thing that really pleasantly surprised me, and it kind of reinforced a lesson that I sort of knew, is I was always hesitant to ask people for help or for something. Yeah. And, you know, it's like, you know, I'd be hesitant to say, hey, Aaron, can I be on your podcast? Because I'd be afraid you'd say no. And so when I decided I wanted to interview 100 people, I thought, all right, how many people do I have to ask in order to get 100? And I only heard no from 2 people. And that surprised me. I don't know if it pleasantly surprised me that, you know, if you don't ask, the answer is going to be no.
No, because you didn't ask.
Right. But if you do ask, the answer may be yes. And so, you know, part of why I often wouldn't ask is because it's like, oh, that fear of rejection. So there was some fear, but all right, if they say no, what's the worst that's going to happen? So it's like, all right.
You hit on a really good point there too, Brian, because at all of the executives I coach, well, not just executives, but I coach high achievers predominantly, people who are driven individuals, and they want what next? They want more out of their life, right? We'll come back to that one next.
I know we will, because you and I were kind of going back and forth on it.
The show, so we're coming back. But these are the people I coach, and they really suck, including myself, at asking for help.
Yeah.
I did a terrible job. I am still working on that. And knowing that people want to help. If you ask, you're like, would you mind? Of course. Are you kidding me? You know, I mean, I actually have a friend, and she's now like traveling around the world. Bless her. She's having so much fun. But when she was living near me, she would be my ask for help accountability buddy.
Yeah.
and because I would always try to be this terribly, or not terribly, but massively independent go-getter, and I don't need help, and help is a judgment. I had a judgment against myself for asking for help because I saw that as a weakness.
Well, and that's, we see it as a weakness. And I also see that, okay, if I ask you, Aaron, for help, I'm burdening you.
Right. We're in a position.
Right. But what I also don't realize is if I ask you for help, I'm boosting up your ego because you're better at it than I am. And who doesn't want their ego boosted? What I'm saying is, hey, Aaron, I'm not as good at this as you are. Can you guide me? And so it makes you feel good. So it's kind of this win-win situation. Now, granted, there are times where it may be a burden, and I'm hoping that the other person's like, at this point, I can't do it. But it's an ego boost when somebody asks you for help.
And you're respecting the other person's skill and expertise. And that's a big lesson I had to learn, and I actually wrote about it in my book too. So it's interesting, there's correlation in both of our books. As a part of being able to achieve goals, and also a part of the social construct. I tell this, you drive your credibility and your success, but you don't determine it. Other people do. Because unless it's a solo endurance event, when you're talking about leading teams, you're talking about being in leadership, you're talking about a company, or evolving in your career, in your profession, you're working with other people.
Yeah, and I would
that's all act.
And I would even say, even in endurance events. I mean, I did kind of one of the bigger ones I did was I ran 205 miles around Lake Tahoe. So it's a beautiful lake that spans California and Nevada. And it's all at high elevation. So you're almost at you get to almost 10,000 feet at one point. And while I'm the one running, I'm the one that crosses the finish line, I'm the one that gets to wear the t-shirt. I do it I was able to do it because I had a support crew of 7 people, that would meet me, at mile 72 and make sure I have a new pair of shoes. Or I have a wife that
very true
allows me. I mean, you look at a lot of the people that do these big things, they have a partner that is very supportive. So I couldn't do it by myself. I'm just the fortunate one that gets to wear the t-shirt that says I did it. So even in what is perceived as an individual endeavor, there's a lot of people, and that's where the C of EPIC, of collaborate, is why it's there. Yeah,
it's so important. I mean, it's not only are we human beings social creatures.
Yeah.
Right. And not only do we get wonderful, this endorphin and oxytocin, all these wonderful chemicals coming from this collaboration, but also we are designed, if you will, to excel when we are in a collaborative state. We just are. I mean, when I competed and did it wasn't a competition, it was more of an event. It was an achievement. I did a 100-mile gravel race, which is
it's a significant event.
Fair amount, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't fast. I wasn't aiming for time. I just wanted to complete it and be in relative good form to do it. I hired a trainer. I never hired a trainer. I hired a trainer. First time in my entire life, I hired a trainer.
And what was the net result by doing that?
It gave me the structure.
Yeah.
That I needed, and the insight and the wisdom, because I hadn't done it before.
Yep.
This person has. She's multiple Ironman completer. I mean, she's a finisher. So she knew what it takes to compete at that level and do these endurance events. So she was able to give me the structure and the insight and the wisdom to be able to show up the way I needed to show up to prepare.
Yeah. And those skills, and this is the reason I had interviewed executives and endurance athletes is because I wanted to be able to see, is there a relationship between what you did for riding your 100 miles on gravel at elevation? Is that similar? That success, does that link into success that you've had, writing a book, having the podcast, your coaching, and there's a lot of similarities. It's
There
those,
are a lot of similarities.
yeah, those people that you can see the finish line, whether it's in sport or in work, those capabilities to get to the finish line are the same in either of them.
And I'd love to hear from anybody either tuning in now or later. You've got like 90% of it knocked, but what is that little thing that gets you derailed during the goal achievement, whether it's an event or a goal or a life goal or a professional goal? Because sometimes I find that we'll get to that last 25%.
Yeah.
And we're close. And either that last 25% is a push for us, because I know the last 25% of a 100-mile gravel race, it's no joke. You want to give up. I quit. No kidding. I quit like 150 times.
It's funny because I don't find the last 25% the hardest. I find that third 25% the hardest. So I'll always break, either a project or a large endurance events down into 4 quarters. Okay. So the first 25% is easy because, let's say you're riding 100 miles. So the first 25 miles I find is easy because I've done it before. I've done it in training. I've done it a whole bunch of times. It's early in the day. It's probably not windy, and it's not hot.
Yeah.
Those are easy. The next 25 aren't that bad because I've done this distance before. And it's not late in the day. It's still kind of middle of the day. So I know I can do that. The last 25%, I'll get back to the third one in a moment. So the last 25 miles, I find it's like I'm close to the finish line. I can see the finish line. I just need to work a little bit harder and I'll get there. But I'm really close. So momentum is going to carry.
Yeah, I guess you have a point there. Maybe when I quit 150 times, it was a bit.
So it's that 50 to 75 miles or 50 to 75%, because you're just over halfway. It's hot in the day. You're tired. You got a long way before you see that. You're dehydrated. You got a long way before you see that finish line. And it's the same thing in projects. I mean, think about if you've worked on a year-long project and, at the beginning, it's like, oh yeah, this is fun. It's exciting. We got a new team. And then you get into it and you're halfway through and it's like, oh, I'm so tired. But then you get to that point where it's like, I can see the finish line.
Yeah, I can see the finish line. We're almost done. Wow, I can't believe it's over. Yeah.
So it's how do you, the challenge I talk about this in the book is how do you persevere during those times, and what are some of the things that you can do? Right.
And coming back to the asking for help.
One
of the things is that connection. Yeah. Whether it's just a connection, whether it's support, whether it's, just talking about it, whatever that looks like for you, whatever type of goal or project or achievement you're trying to work through, is having that touch point with someone that is either on the same journey or a similar journey or has done one, or is that person who has got your back, right? What I call your personal board of directors. There's people who can help you through these tough times. Or if it's a project, maybe it's a project team, and just being transparent. So often we're not transparent because we're afraid of judgment. Well, if I say, I don't know about you, but I'm really struggling through this. I'm finding X, Y, and Z kind of difficult right now. I don't know if it's just because we've been at this for a while or what's going on. And then people will go, you know what, me too. Then you at least have that synergy where you're on the same page and you go, okay, well, what can we do about it, right? It's coming back to that support group is so very important. And I think it was at mile 75. I was really about to pull over and stop. I was so dehydrated. I was so I'd done electrolytes, I'd done everything I could. My body was just tapping out. And I had a lady pull up in one of the support cars, and we just had a little chat. Yeah. And she gave me some pickle juice, and life is good. And I finished.
It's knowing what you need. I love that comment that Mariama talks about, the African saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I love that. And it's an area that I'm always working on. And it's like, okay, how do I be better at that? So thanks, Mariama, for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. She always has great wisdom to share.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap up the show today, we've got a couple more minutes. I definitely want to dive into any points of the book that you definitely want to mention to people, whether they're achieving personal goals or whether you're leading a team. And even if that's something that's, you're like, gosh, I don't know if I can do that. What would you say to someone who, says, I don't know if I can do that? What would you say to them?
I think that's a good question because I get that question a fair amount, and it's like, okay, how do you take that so and make it smaller,
right,
and break it down into smaller chunks of things that, I can do that, and I can do that, and I can do that. So then you get to that point where, I can do that. So. When I talk about in the book, I talk about the really big things. These aren't the things that we're going to do this year. That's iterate. These are the things that you want to do in life in 10, 15, 30, 20 years, whatever it is.
Right.
So, it's I want to start my own business. I want to travel the world. I want to do 100-mile gravel bike ride in Idaho. I can't do that today. And so that's the key point. It's like, all right, what can I do today that will lead me to do that bigger thing? So, I think that's why the E in EPIC is so important. It's that envision is, do you know the big things in life that you want to accomplish, and how do they link back to what's important to you?
Yeah. And what's important to you, not
not you. Yeah. Am I doing
not
what's important?
Trying to press, but you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember when my wife and I, after we had just traveled around the world for 7 months, and we were getting ready to get married, and we said, when we have kids, we should do this with them and spend a year. We couldn't do it then, if we didn't have kids, but it's like, what are the things that we have to do between now and the next 10, 12 years in order to get that? What do we have to save? How do we have to plan? I can't do it today. And I always say, we start off, it's the phases of optimism from I can't to I did. And there's a bunch of phases. And the one right after I can't is I can't yet. So, but that starts opening up the opportunity.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because there's an important thing about language, and particularly how we speak to ourselves and how we approach things. And take, for example, talking to one of my clients from wrapping up, and she's like, well, if I get that promotion, instead of when. Yeah. Oh, right. When I get the promotion, I said, if implies that you don't know if you're going to get it or not. Let's grab bag.
It's kind of out of your control.
Out of your control. You don't have a skin in the game. You're not in the game. When is very, very different. And if you really want to make it powerful, say when and add a date.
Right. And then we could go in there. One of the quotes I like is, and I saw your quote, Mariama, thank you, is, once you stop believing something is impossible. So when you stop believing it's impossible, you start believing it's possible.
That's right.
And I love that quote, because it takes that impossible and it's like, okay, it's not impossible. So if something's not impossible, it must be possible.
Must be possible. That's right.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up the show, I want to touch on one thing that I think a lot of people can relate to, whether they're listening now or later. There were some big goals going into 2020, right?
Yeah.
We were going to go travel over in Europe. I mean, there was
that didn't happen.
We had to get big goals. And it kind of got derailed, and there was circumstances outside of our control, right? It just wasn't the right time. So what do you say to those people who their goals got derailed? It wasn't necessarily because they didn't do the right things, they didn't show up the right way, they didn't have the framework right, they didn't call on their team, they didn't follow that EPIC framework that you provided. It wasn't because of that. It was really for something that maybe it just became not the right time. They had to take care of a parent, or maybe something happened in their family, or maybe something happened to them physically. COVID, right? Those things happen. life happens, and sometimes it's not to our plan. So what would you say when that happens?
Yeah, first of all, it sucked.
Yeah, showing up and saying, okay, and not trying to push the, oh, it's okay. Let's not be toxically positive. If you're experiencing emotion, allow yourself to experience the emotion. And then what do you do with it?
Yeah, I think it's all acknowledged. Okay, yeah, it did suck. We were scheduled to go to Italy toward the end of March.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and kids and I are well traveled, and so I'm watching what's coming up in end of February, and I'm thinking, the news overblows things.
It does.
I have been in countries where there's been a bombing, and I know what's going on because I can see it, and I know what's on the news, and you only see the car that's blown up, but it's very rare that you're going to get injured that way. And so I knew it's like the news is probably overblowing this a little bit. I think we can still go to Italy. And so I'm not ready to cancel the trip yet. And then it did get to a point where maybe there's some accuracy in the news. And so we did cancel
or
it.
At least the response to said news will be prohibitive. Right.
So, part of it is looking at it's like, what can you control and what can you not control? I could not control what was going on. So I can't let that work. Now, this is easier said than done. I can't control all these things. And so of what's going on outside, but I can control my reaction. And so, no, we didn't get to go to Italy. We need to pivot. And so there are times you have to pivot. I mean, and I talked to a number of different executives where the company did not go as planned. And you can keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing, but eventually you run out of money. And so didn't work. Now I need to adjust and kind of go back to, all right, what's most important to me and what can I control? So there's a lot of things. I mean, in the book, I talk about a lot of things of how you deal with those challenges. If when you're running 200 miles, kind of 8 marathons back to back, there are times you just feel like crap. But you got to keep going. You felt it at mile 75 on your bike ride. And so you got to know those things in your head that will keep you moving forward. And so I give a number of them in the book, but one is control what you can control. Those things you can't control, let go of, and figure out what can you influence. You can control your response to things.
Yeah, and be kind to yourself. We're often quite judgy of ourselves. Let's just say, not every event goes swimmingly. Let's use this for example. And you can use it for anything, whether it's achieving something professionally, personally, going on a trip to Italy. Yeah. I injured myself and I couldn't complete that 100-mile gravel race. I was signed up to do 100 miles at Dirty Kanza, which is a big event, before they got taken over. It doesn't matter. And I could only do 70 miles. It's because I was injured and I had to make a decision. And man, it's tough because you want to say, I didn't call myself a quitter in my head, but you did. So how can you be kind to yourself and go, look, yes, I could have pushed forward and then I may have been out a lot longer.
And that is it's an important question. Anybody that has done ultra distance events knows that. It's like, okay, if I were to continue going, am I going to do long-term damage? Or is it just short-term pain?
There's a difference.
There's
a lot of pain in short term. And we're talking about a little bit about that sacrifices and the difference between a season and, something that's systemic. Or, a syndrome. Don't want to create a systemic problem. So can you keep it to be a season? Yeah. So when things happen, it's how you're absolutely right, how we show up at that time. And then how agile are we to be able to flex and adjust? Yeah. So at that time, I had a choice. I could suck my thumb and feel sorry for myself for the rest of the event, or I could have fun. I met a whole bunch of people that were also having to sag back for various reasons. I'm not judging them and what their reasons why they had to sag back out of the event. I met a whole bunch of people. Then I went and had a lot of fun at the event, cheering people in. I mean, I was limping, but hey, I was there. So I made a choice, and then it's what I do after that.
Yeah.
Do I feel sorry for myself, or do I
make your decision and move on?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But you got to feel confident with that decision, and you have to know that, okay, if I am not going to finish, am I going to be comfortable in 2 days or 3 days with this decision? Because it is hard to see a DNF did not finish when it's like, I had more in me. Often we quit especially on endurance events. And I would say the same thing at work. We quit because of here.
Right.
Not because of our legs or our muscles.
Or our ability or expertise.
Or ability, yeah.
We quit in our head.
We quit in our head.
How many people I've talked to, all they needed to do was make a phone call or make a request or have a conversation.
Sit down, take a breath, talk to somebody like you did. And then, all right, I just need a little peace and quiet for a moment. Let's just try this again. Yeah.
Yeah. Before you opt out, just know what your options are, and are you comfortable with that, and talk to somebody. It's okay.
Okay. Oh, I love this.
Well, Brian, is there anything else? I mean, we could keep talking for quite some time. I want to make sure that you honor your time. And it was such a pleasure having you on. I want to also say thank you so much for those of you who tuned in live. And if you have any questions, if you're watching the replay later or listening to the podcast, be sure to reach out to Brian. Connect with him on LinkedIn. He's, if you're on YouTube, his connection information is right there. And we'll, of course, post that in the comments here on LinkedIn as well. And, of course, you can find that in the show notes with the podcast. Brian, is there anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up?
Yeah, the book is out on Amazon, so it's Epic Performance, Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. And you connect with me at epicperformances.com. So that's EPIC performances with an S.com. And Aaron, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, so thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure. I've had a lot of fun. Mariama, good to see you. She says, thank you, Aaron and Brian, for an informative podcast. Always happy to help. That's what we're here to do. My friends, until next time, keep elevating. See you later.
Thank you for tuning in on the Career Coffee Chat podcast. It's been a pleasure. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is coacheurban@gmail.com or tweet at coacheurban, Instagram, coach.eurban, or reach out to my Facebook group, Elevate Your Career. So I'd love to learn more about you, hear your insights, and what questions you have. You can find out more about me at coacheurban.com. And don't forget, please do reach out on LinkedIn. You can find me at Aaron Urban. Until next time, cheers. Here's to caffeinating your career.